He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing nervously at the ground, then back at Marcus. They were really mean. I didn't know what to do. Marcus knelt down to meet Ethan at eye level, his heart aching at the boy's vulnerability. You did what you could, kid. Sometimes, just standing up for yourself is the bravest thing you can do, he replied, his voice steady and reassuring. Ethan nodded, still fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I wish I could be brave like you. Everyone at school calls me names. They say I'm different because of my glasses. He pushed them up the bridge of his nose, a gesture that revealed his insecurity. I don't want to be different. I just want to fit in. Marcus felt a pang of empathy. He remembered being a child, feeling out of place and yearning for acceptance. You know, he said, being different isn't a bad thing. It just means you have your own way of seeing the world. You're special, Ethan, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The boy's face lit up for a moment, and Marcus could see the flicker of hope in his eyes. Really? You think I'm special? Absolutely, Marcus affirmed, his tone encouraging. Bravery comes in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes it takes more courage to be yourself than to fight back. Remember that. Ethan smiled, the tension in his small shoulders easing slightly. I'll try to remember that. I want to be brave like you. Just then, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and Marcus's heart dropped. He recognized the man stepping out of the vehicle almost immediately. Richard, Ethan's father. The businessman was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his demeanor exuding authority and control. Marcus's stomach twisted, recalling their last encounter and the bitter history that lay between them. Ethan, there you are, Richard called out, his voice booming. He approached with an air of impatience, oblivious to the scene that had just unfolded. You're late. I told you to wait by the car. His eyes darted past Marcus, not registering the homeless man who had just intervened to protect his son. Ethan's expression shifted from joy to apprehension. I was just talking to... Enough, Richard interrupted, cutting off his son. Get in the car. We have places to be. His tone left no room for argument. Marcus stood back, feeling a mix of pride for having helped Ethan and sorrow at the boy's quick return to his father's shadow. He watched as Ethan hesitated, glancing back at him as if seeking reassurance, but Richard's commanding presence loomed large. With a heavy heart, Marcus stepped away, knowing his moment of connection with the boy was slipping through his fingers. Ethan finally nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, Dad, he murmured, climbing into the back seat of the car. Richard slid in after him, the door shutting with a finality that echoed in Marcus's mind. He felt a sense of loss, as if he had just let go of something precious. As the car pulled away, Marcus turned back to the street corner, the familiar sounds of the city surrounding him, the laughter of children playing, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. All felt distant now. He sank down onto the edge of the curb, the weight of the world pressing heavily on his shoulders. It was hard to shake the feeling of inadequacy that clung to him like a shadow. Hey man, you did good. A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Leo, a fellow homeless man who often shared the corner with Marcus. Leo had a gruff exterior, but there was a warmth in his eyes that showed he cared. I saw the whole thing. Those punks didn't know what hit em. Thanks, Leo, Marcus replied, forcing a smile. Just doing what I could. Yeah, but you stood up for that kid. Not many people would have done that. You got heart, Marcus. Leo reached into his bag and pulled out a half-eaten sandwich, offering it to Marcus. Here, you look like you could use some food. Marcus chuckled softly, accepting the sandwich. I appreciate it, but you need it more than I do. Maybe, but I'm not the one who just saved a kid from a bunch of bullies. You earned yourself a meal, my friend. Leo's eyes sparkled with mischief as he nudged Marcus playfully. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the bond of shared experiences knitting them together in a world that often felt divided. Marcus took a bite of the sandwich, the taste grounding him, bringing him back to the present. You know, I think that kid needed someone to believe in him, he said, his thoughts drifting back to Ethan. I hope I made a difference, even if just for a little while. "You did more than you know," Leo replied, his voice sincere. "Kids remember stuff like that. They carry it with them. You gave him something to hold on to, especially if he's dealing with those bullies." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Marcus felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. The encounter with Ethan had awakened something deep inside, a desire to be a force for good, to help others who felt lost and alone. Perhaps he could still make a difference, even amidst his struggles. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered to life, Marcus found himself reflecting on the day's events. He watched the people passing by, each lost in their own world, unaware of the silent battles being fought around them. Yet he felt a strange kinship with them all. Each person was carrying their own story, their own struggles, just as he was. With a newfound resolve, Marcus decided he would find a way to support not just Ethan, but others like him, children who were facing challenges alone in a world that often overlooked them. Maybe he could organize small gatherings, a safe space for kids to share their stories and support one another. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could also teach them about bravery and kindness, the very qualities that had pulled him back from the brink of despair. Tomorrow, he murmured to himself, determination hardening in his chest. Tomorrow, I'll start something new. As he settled down for the night, the sounds of the city faded into a comforting hum. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a sense of purpose wrapping around him like a warm blanket. He was ready to embrace whatever came next, to be the hero that Ethan needed, even if it was in small, quiet ways. The sun broke over the horizon, casting a gentle golden hue across the streets of Chicago. Marcus sat on his usual corner, the cool morning air nipping at his skin, but he welcomed it as he pondered the previous day's events. The memory of Ethan's grateful face lingered in his mind, a flicker of hope amidst his otherwise bleak existence. Yet, as he watched the hustle and bustle of pedestrians, a familiar feeling of unworthiness washed over him. "What can a man like me offer a boy like him?" he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced around, observing the people rushing by, wrapped in their own worlds. Businessmen in crisp suits, mothers juggling coffee cups and children, and teenagers laughing, their voices echoing in the morning air. Marcus felt like a ghost among the living, invisible and forgotten. He had always been on the fringes, but now, with the memory of his act of bravery still fresh, he felt an inexplicable urge to be more than just an observer. Maybe I can help him, he thought, the idea sparking a flicker of determination within him. But the thought of approaching Ethan again filled him with dread. What could he possibly say? Marcus sat on the cold, hard pavement of a downtown Chicago street corner, feeling the chill seep through his worn-out jacket. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the bustling city. He observed the hurried footsteps of passers-by, their faces a blur of indifference and preoccupation. To them, he was a ghost, an invisible man in a world that had long forgotten him. He had grown accustomed to the dismissive glances and the way people would instinctively steer their children away from him, as if he were a threat merely by virtue of his existence. At 42, Marcus had lived a life filled with trials that had led him to this moment. Once a promising artist with dreams of painting murals that would brighten the city, he now found solace in the memories of a life he could barely recognize. He often closed his eyes and let the sounds of the city wash over him, the laughter of children, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. But today, the sounds seemed more pronounced, more vivid, as if they were calling him back to the world he had left behind. "Look at that guy," a voice called out from a nearby group of teenagers. Marcus opened his eyes to see a trio of them leaning against a lamppost, their laughter sharp and mocking. One of the boys, a tall, gangly lad with messy hair, pointed directly at him. "I bet he thinks he's some kind of artist or something." If you're enjoying this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss any of our updates. Your support helps us bring you the best content possible. Continuing, Marcus felt the sting of their words, but he swallowed his pride and continued to watch the world go by. He had learned that fighting back only made things worse. Instead, He turned his gaze toward a small park across the street where children played freely, their joy a stark contrast to his reality. Among the children, one boy stood out, Ethan. He was smaller than the others, with big, round glasses that magnified his wide, innocent eyes. His skin was a shade lighter than Marcus's, and his curly hair framed his face like a halo. Ethan chased after a soccer ball, his laughter ringing out like music. But soon, Marcus noticed a change in the atmosphere. A group of older boys had entered the scene, and their eyes were fixed on the little boy. "Hey, look, it's the nerd," one of the bullies, a boy named Jake, shouted. The group erupted in laughter, and Marcus felt his heart race. He had seen this before. Kids like Ethan, different and vulnerable, often became easy targets for the cruel taunts of others. "Why are you playing with those losers?" Jake continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "You'll never be one of us. Just go home." Ethan, Marcus felt a pang of empathy for the boy. In that moment, he could see echoes of his younger self in Ethan's timid posture, the way he shrank back as the bullies advanced. He could have turned away, could have convinced himself that it was none of his business, but something deep inside him stirred, a flicker of courage that urged him to act. With a deep breath, Marcus rose to his feet. His legs protested as he stood, but he couldn't bear to watch Ethan suffer any longer. He navigated through the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest as he approached the group of bullies. "Hey!" he called out, his voice firm despite the tremor of uncertainty underneath. The bullies paused, surprise etched on their faces as they turned to see who dared to confront them. "Leave him alone." Jake squinted at Marcus, his bravado faltering for a moment. "And who are you?" he sneered, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Some homeless guy trying to play hero?" "I'm the guy standing between you and that kid," Marcus replied, stepping forward. He could feel the weight of their gaze, the judgment simmering just beneath the surface. But he stood tall, allowing his presence to form a barrier between Ethan and the taunts. The other bullies exchanged glances, their confidence wavering. "What are you going to do about it?" Jake challenged, but there was a slight tremor in his voice. "I'm going to make sure you understand that bullying isn't cool," Marcus said, his voice steady. "You think it's funny to pick on someone because he's different? You think that makes you tough? It doesn't. It makes you weak." Ethan looked up at Marcus, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. Marcus could see the boy's fear slowly dissipating, replaced by a flicker of hope. The bullies hesitated, the laughter dying down as they weighed their options. "Whatever, man," Jake finally scoffed, taking a step back. "We don't want any trouble." With that, he turned on his heel and signaled to his friends to follow. They slinked away, their bravado evaporating like morning mist. Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He turned to Ethan, whose face was a mixture of relief and admiration. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze. Ethan nodded slowly, a shy smile breaking through his earlier anxiety. "Thank you. I didn't know what to do." Marcus smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. "You did great. Just remember, it's okay to be different. It's what makes you special." Ethan's smile widened, and for a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus," he replied, extending a hand. Ethan grasped it tentatively, and Marcus felt a connection, a shared understanding of loneliness and the need for bravery. As they stood there, an unexpected bond forming between them, Marcus knew that this encounter had changed something deep within him. He had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, if only for a moment. But as he looked around at the bustling street, the reality of his situation began to seep back in. He was still homeless, still invisible to most. Yet for Ethan, he had become something more, an unexpected hero. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the city, Marcus felt a sense of purpose stir within him. Maybe he could be a protector, a guide for kids like Ethan who needed someone to stand up for them. But just as quickly as that thought emerged, it was followed by doubt. Could a man like him, with his past and his circumstances, truly make a difference in a world that seemed so unforgiving? In that moment, he realized he might never know the answer. The only thing he could do was take it one step at a time, starting with the small victories like saving a boy from bullies. As Ethan waved goodbye and joined a group of other children who had returned to play, Marcus felt the warmth of the moment linger. It was fleeting, yet it ignited something new within him. A flicker of hope that perhaps he could find his way back into the world, one act of kindness at a time. Marcus watched as the young boy, Ethan, cautiously approached him, his small frame dwarfed by the towering buildings of downtown Chicago. The boy's eyes were wide with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty, a reflection of the tumultuous emotions swirling inside him. Marcus, still reeling from the adrenaline of confronting the bullies, felt a warmth spreading through him as Ethan spoke. "Thank you for saving me," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of his appreciation. How could he possibly step into the life of a boy who deserved so much more than the confines of Marcus's own existence? He shook his head, trying to dispel the notion. "You've got no place in his world," he reminded himself. As he sat lost in thought, he heard the familiar clatter of a coffee shop's doorbell. He turned to see Richard, Ethan's father, entering the cafe with a commanding presence. Dressed in a tailored suit, he carried an air of authority that contrasted sharply with Marcus's ragged appearance. Richard ordered his coffee with a sharpness in his voice, his demeanor suggesting he was not in the mood for small talk. Marcus felt a pang of anxiety. The memory of their shared past loomed over him like a cloud. Just then, Ethan's laughter echoed outside as he ran into the cafe, his bright eyes sparkling with excitement. "Dad, you won't believe what happened yesterday," he exclaimed, his voice filled with an innocent enthusiasm that stirred something deep within Marcus. He instinctively leaned closer to catch the boy's words. Richard, however, seemed preoccupied as he sipped his coffee. "What is it, Ethan? Make it quick." "I have a meeting soon," he replied, barely looking at his son. Ethan's enthusiasm faltered momentarily, but he pressed on. "There was this man, Dad. He saved me from the bullies. He was really brave." The words burst out of him, a mixture of pride and excitement. At that moment, Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and trepidation. Ethan was speaking of him, and yet, he was just a few feet away, hidden in the shadows of the cafe's entrance. He watched as Richard's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Ethan, I don't want you hanging around people like that," Richard said, his tone dropping to a stern whisper. "You don't know what kind of person he is. He might be dangerous." "Dad, he was a hero. He helped me," Ethan protested, his voice rising in frustration. Richard leaned down, his eyes narrowing. "Listen to me. I know you want to believe everyone is good, but you have to be careful. You can't trust people like that," he insisted, dismissing Ethan's words as if they were nothing more than childish fantasies. Marcus's heart sank at Richard's words. He felt a wave of shame wash over him, the old familiar feelings of being dehumanized and invisible creeping back in. The man he once knew as a formidable businessman had become a symbol of the prejudices he had fought against all his life. Suddenly, he felt the weight of all the judgments he had faced, not just from Richard but from society as a whole. "Dad, he's not like that. He was nice to me." Ethan's voice broke through Marcus's thoughts, filled with desperation. The boy was standing his ground, defending Marcus against the very person who was supposed to protect him. Richard straightened up, his expression hardening. "Ethan, I don't want to hear any more about this. We'll talk about it later," he stated, dismissively turning his back to the boy and walking towards the exit. As Richard left, Marcus felt an overwhelming urge to comfort Ethan, but he held back, afraid of intruding once more into the boy's life. He watched as Ethan's face fell, his small shoulders slumping in disappointment. Marcus longed to reach out, to tell the boy that he was not what Richard had painted him to be, but the fear of rejection paralyzed him. Instead, he remained hidden, an observer of a scene that struck him to his core. A moment later, Ethan stepped outside, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. He spotted Marcus and their eyes met. For a fleeting moment, there was a silent understanding between them, a bond forged in shared struggles. Marcus felt a rush of warmth and empathy for the boy, who was fighting his own battles, albeit in a different arena. "Hey," Ethan called softly, his voice barely carrying over the sounds of the city. "Thank you for what you did yesterday. I mean it." Marcus offered a gentle smile, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. "You're a brave kid, Ethan. You stood up for yourself, and that's not easy." Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with admiration. "But my dad, he doesn't understand. He thinks everyone is dangerous. Sometimes people don't see beyond what they know," Marcus replied, his tone steady yet tinged with sadness. "It's not your fault. You just have to keep being yourself." Ethan frowned, glancing back towards the cafe where his father had just exited. "But what if he's right? What if someone hurts me?" Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "You have to believe in yourself. People can be afraid of what they don't understand, but that doesn't mean you should stop being brave. Remember, everyone has their own battles to fight." Ethan's eyes sparkled with hope, and for a moment, Marcus felt like he had made a difference. But as the morning continued to unfold around them, the shadows of doubt crept back into Marcus's heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that his past would always haunt him, that he would always be seen through the lens of his circumstances. As they stood there, the weight of their respective worlds pressing down on them, Marcus knew that somehow their paths were intertwined. Even if Richard's prejudices loomed large, there was a flicker of connection, a bond that had been formed in the crucible of vulnerability and bravery. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could be a part of Ethan's life in a way that transcended his status as a homeless man. With a final, lingering look, Ethan turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone once more. The day stretched ahead of him, filled with uncertainty and longing. The encounter had ignited something within him, a desire to step beyond the shadows of his existence. But the question remained: would he have the courage to reach out again, to break through the barriers that had held him back for so long? Marcus had never thought of himself as a leader, but as the days passed since his encounter with Ethan, something began to stir within him. The act of protecting the boy from the bullies had ignited a flicker of purpose he thought long extinguished. He spent his mornings wandering the streets of Chicago, not just as a homeless man, but as someone who could make a difference, however small. One afternoon, he gathered a few of the other homeless individuals he often saw at the park. They sat on the benches under the shade of a sprawling oak tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting dappled patterns on the ground. Marcus stood before them, his hands in the pockets of his worn jacket, a slight tremor of nerves coursing through him. "Listen up, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his heart. "I know we've all been through hell, but we don't have to go through it alone. We can share our stories, support each other. I'm no leader, but I believe we can make a little community right here." A murmur of agreement rippled through the small group, a few nodding their heads. An older man named Frank, his beard white and scraggly, leaned forward. "You're right, Marcus. I've been feeling low, like I'm invisible. Ain't nobody caring about us." Marcus met Frank's gaze, a connection forming in that shared understanding. "We can care about each other," he replied. "Let's start meeting regularly. We can talk about what's bothering us, share ideas, maybe even help each other find resources. It's not much, but it's a start." His words resonated with the group, and soon they began to gather on a weekly basis. They shared stories of their past lives, jobs lost, families broken, dreams deferred. As they formed bonds, Marcus felt something shift within himself. He was no longer just a shadow on the streets, but a part of a community. Each meeting began with laughter and ended with the weight of shared burdens feeling a little lighter. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow across the park, Marcus spotted a familiar figure approaching. It was Ethan, his small frame standing out against the backdrop of the twilight. The boy's face lit up when he saw Marcus, who was sitting on a bench with a few others. "Marcus!" Ethan exclaimed, running up to him. I was hoping to find you here. Hey there, Ethan, Marcus said, his voice brightening at the sight of the boy. He motioned for Ethan to sit beside him. What's got you out here this late? I wanted to talk to you, Ethan said, his expression turning serious. About the bullies and everything. He hesitated, glancing at the other men nearby who were lost in conversation. Can we talk alone? Marcus nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. They stepped a few paces away, the sounds of laughter and chatter fading into the background. What's on your mind, kiddo? Ethan looked down at his shoes, scuffing the toe against the pavement. The kids at school. They still bother me. They call me names and say I don't belong. I try to ignore them, but it's hard. Marcus felt a pang of empathy for Ethan. He remembered being a child, feeling the sting of isolation and bullying. It takes a lot of bravery not to let them get to you. You've already shown that bravery by coming to me, but it's not enough, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wish I could be like you, Marcus. You stood up for me. I want to stand up for myself, too. A sense of pride swelled in Marcus's chest. You can, Ethan. It starts with believing in yourself. You have to remember that you're not alone. You've got me and you've got your own strength inside you, just like I did when I stepped in front of those bullies. You can find your voice, and when you do, it will be powerful. Ethan's eyes brightened a little. Do you really think so? I know so, Marcus replied earnestly. And if you ever feel overwhelmed, you can come back here. Okay? I'll be right here to talk. Okay, Ethan said, a small smile creeping onto his face. Thank you, Marcus. It means a lot. Just as they were about to head back, the shadows lengthened, and the comforting sounds of the park faded. Marcus felt a sudden chill in the air, not just from the cooling evening, but from the thought of what might happen if Ethan faced the bullies again. Hey, Ethan, can I ask you something? Marcus said, his voice low. Sure, Ethan replied. Do you think your dad knows what you're going through? I mean, do you talk to him about it? Ethan frowned, his earlier cheer fading. Not really. He's always busy with work. I think he doesn't want to hear about school stuff. It just makes him mad. Mad? Why? Marcus asked, his curiosity piqued. Because he thinks I should be tougher, I guess. He told me once that I need to be a man and not let anyone push me around. But it's not that easy. Marcus's heart sank. He could sense the weight of Ethan's unspoken fears. It's okay to talk to him about it, Maybe he just doesn't understand how tough it is for you. Sometimes parents don't realize. Ethan shrugged, looking unconvinced. I don't want to bother him. He has his own problems. Maybe you'd be surprised, Marcus said gently. You could try. You might find that talking helps. Suddenly, a voice boomed from the path behind them. Ethan, there you are. Both Marcus and Ethan turned to see Richard striding towards them, his expression a mixture of irritation and concern. He was impeccably dressed, his suit tailored to perfection, a stark contrast to the casual wear of the park visitors. What are you doing here? Richard snapped, looking from Ethan to Marcus, his gaze hardening. I told you to wait by the car. Ethan's face fell, and he stepped back, caught between his father's authority and his newfound courage. I was just talking to Marcus, he said quietly, his voice faltering. Richard's eyes narrowed as he focused on Marcus, a flicker of disdain crossing his features. And who is this exactly? You shouldn't be talking to someone like him. Dad, Marcus is my friend. He helped me. Ethan protested, stepping closer to Marcus as if seeking protection. Helped you? Richard echoed, incredulity lacing his tone. This is the kind of person you want to associate with? A homeless man? You don't even know him. Stop it, Ethan shouted, surprising both men with the force of his words. You don't know anything about him. He's more of a man than you are. He's not just some homeless guy. He's a hero. Richard's face darkened. Do not speak to me like that, Ethan. I am your father. Marcus felt a surge of emotions. Pride for Ethan's defense of him, but also a pang of concern for the boy's safety. The tension in the air was palpable, and he sensed that the confrontation was only just beginning. Ethan, Listen to me, Richard continued, his voice dropping but still sharp. You need to stay away from people like him. They're trouble, and I won't have you getting involved. You're better than that. I don't want to be better than him. Ethan yelled back, his eyes blazing with defiance. He's helped me when you weren't there. The argument escalated, with Richard's anger clashing against Ethan's desperation to be understood. Marcus stood by, feeling the weight of their conflict, and he realized that he had stepped into a battleground far beyond his own struggles. As the night deepened and the stars began to twinkle above them, Marcus found himself caught between two worlds, the world of a boy seeking courage and a father cloaked in prejudice and fear. He felt the gravity of the moment, knowing that the outcome of this confrontation could change everything for Ethan. But as the shadows grew longer and the voices grew louder, Marcus understood that he had to be the steady presence, the calm in the storm. They were all searching for something: acceptance, understanding, and perhaps a way out of their pain. And in that moment, he vowed to be there for Ethan, whatever it took. The sun hung low in the sky, casting warm hues across the park, where families gathered for picnics and children played on the swings. Marcus sat on a bench, his weathered hands clasped together, lost in thought. The air was filled with laughter and the sound of distant chatter, but an uneasy tension gripped his heart. He had been thinking about Ethan and the strained relationship between the boy and his father, Richard, ever since their last encounter. As he watched the vibrant scene unfold before him, Marcus could see Ethan in the distance, his small figure darting around, joyfully playing with other children. Marcus felt a swell of affection for the boy, a connection that had formed in the wake of their brief but impactful meeting. It was as if a part of him had awakened, and he wanted to ensure that Ethan felt safe and supported, especially given the challenges he faced with the bullies and his father's dismissive attitude. Suddenly, Marcus noticed Richard striding into the park, his crisp suit sharply contrasting with the carefree atmosphere. Marcus's heart raced. He had not anticipated crossing paths with the businessman again, but perhaps fate had other plans. Taking a deep breath, Marcus resolved to approach Richard. He believed that somehow they needed to have a conversation to bridge the gap that separated them. "Excuse me, Mr. Richards?" Marcus called out, standing up from the bench as Richard passed, his eyes focused on Ethan. Richard halted, turning slowly to face Marcus, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "What do you want?" Richard snapped, his voice clipped. He glanced at Ethan, who was oblivious to the tension building between the adults. "I just wanted to talk," Marcus said, maintaining a calm demeanor despite the pounding of his heart. "About Ethan. Care about him." Richard's brows furrowed, and he crossed his arms defensively. "What do you know about my son? You're just a—" He hesitated, the word homeless hanging in the air, heavy with disdain. "I'm not here to argue," Marcus said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I just want to ensure he's okay. He's been through a lot, and I can see how much he looks up to you. But it seems like you don't see him the way he needs you to." Richard scoffed, shaking his head. "You think you know what he needs? You don't even have a roof over your head. You're not in a position to dictate what's best for him." A shadow of hurt flickered across Marcus's face, but he pressed on. "I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like no one cares. I've been there, but Ethan, he's bright. He deserves someone who sees him for who he truly is." Richard's jaw tightened as he considered Marcus's words. "And what do you plan to do? Mentor him? Teach him how to be like you?" There was a bitter edge to his tone, one that made Marcus's heart sink. "No," Marcus replied, his voice softer. "I want to help him find his own strength. He's been bullied, and that can break a person's spirit. I just want him to know that bravery comes in many forms, and sometimes it's okay to ask for help." For a moment, silence enveloped them. Richard stared at Marcus, his features betraying a mix of skepticism and something deeper, perhaps a flicker of recognition. Marcus could sense the businessman wrestling with his own biases, his preconceived notions about people like him. "Why should I trust you?" Richard finally asked, his voice lower, more vulnerable. "You're a stranger. You could be anyone." "True," Marcus admitted, But I'm not here to harm him. I'm trying to protect him. I don't expect you to understand my life, but I do understand what it feels like to be alone. I see that in Ethan, and it breaks my heart." Richard's expression softened, if only slightly. "You don't know anything about my life either," he said, his voice wavering. "You don't know the pressures I face or the choices I had to make." "No," Marcus conceded. "I don't. But I do know that we all carry our burdens. Just because I'm homeless doesn't mean I don't understand struggle. We are more alike than you think." Richard looked away, his eyes narrowing as he observed Ethan laughing with another child. "I don't want him to end up like you," he muttered under his breath. "That's just it, isn't it?" Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "You don't see him. You see what you fear. You're worried he'll be like me. But what if he's not? What if he's something greater? You have the power to shape that, to encourage him to be brave, to be himself." Richard's brow furrowed deeply, and he seemed to grapple internally with Marcus's words. Marcus could see the walls Richard had built around himself, fortified by fear and prejudice, beginning to crack. Yet, just as quickly, Richard's expression hardened again. "I don't need your advice," he snapped, turning to leave. "Stay away from my son." As Richard strode away, Marcus felt a mixture of defeat and determination. He had tried, and while it hadn't gone as he had hoped, he wouldn't give up on Ethan. The boy needed someone to stand by him, to show him that he was not alone. He watched as Ethan continued to play, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between the adults. Later that night, as Marcus settled onto his worn blanket beneath the stars, he couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. Richard's fierce protectiveness over Ethan was understandable, but it was equally clouded by prejudice. He had seen that glimmer of doubt in Richard's eyes, a sign that perhaps the businessman was beginning to question his own beliefs. Across town, Richard sat in his luxurious penthouse, the city lights twinkling like stars. He stared out at the skyline, his thoughts racing. Marcus's words echoed in his mind, challenging everything he believed. He was a successful businessman, a father, yet he felt a gnawing discomfort at the way he treated those on the margins of society. Was he truly protecting Ethan, or was he projecting his fears onto his son? Richard's mind churned with conflicting emotions. He had built a life based on success and control, but was that all there was? He thought about Ethan's bright smile, the way his son had looked at Marcus with admiration. Richard shivered at the thought of stifling that light with his own biases. As the hours of night dragged on, Richard found himself wrestling with sleeplessness, haunted by the realization that he was losing touch with the very essence of fatherhood. Did he really know his son? Or was he too wrapped up in his own fears to see the boy's true potential? In that quiet moment, he made a decision. Marcus may not have been the ideal influence he envisioned for Ethan, but perhaps it was time to explore this unexpected connection, to challenge his own prejudices. Perhaps it was time to see the humanity in those he had long dismissed. Meanwhile, Marcus lay beneath the stars, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders, but also a flicker of hope. He knew that change took time, but he was willing to wait. For Ethan, for Richard, for a chance to show that kindness could heal even the deepest wounds. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to walk it, step by step, one act of bravery at a time. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the park as Marcus and Ethan sat on a weathered bench, sharing stories. The bond they had formed over the past weeks had grown stronger, with Ethan often coming to seek Marcus's guidance and companionship. Marcus had become a protector and mentor to the boy, encouraging him to embrace his uniqueness and stand tall against the bullies who tormented him. "Do you really think I can stand up to Jake?" Ethan asked, biting his lip. His big brown eyes were filled with uncertainty as he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with pride for the boy's bravery. "Absolutely, Ethan. You have more courage than you realize. Remember, it's not just about standing up to them physically. It's about believing in yourself. When you show confidence, they often back down." Ethan looked thoughtful, nodding slowly. "I'll try. I don't want to be scared anymore." Before Marcus could respond, he felt a familiar presence approach. Richard, Ethan's father, appeared at the edge of the park, his sharp suit contrasting starkly with the casual atmosphere. He surveyed the scene, his expression darkening as he spotted Marcus sitting with his son. "Get away from him," Richard barked, striding toward them, his voice slicing through the air like a knife. "Ethan, what did I tell you about talking to strangers?" Marcus straightened, his heart racing. He felt the weight of Richard's gaze, sharp and accusatory. "Sir, I'm just—" "Shut up," Richard snapped, cutting him off. "You think you can just come here and fill my son's head with nonsense? Look at you. You're a nobody, and you have no business being around my child." Ethan flinched at his father's tone, his eyes darting between the two men. "Dad, please," he pleaded. "Marcus is my friend. He helped me when those bullies were picking on me." Richard's expression hardened, disbelief etched across his face. "A friend? You call this man your friend? He's a homeless man, Ethan. He's nothing but a stain on this city." Marcus felt a pang of hurt at Richard's words, but he held his ground. "I may not have a home, but that doesn't mean I'm worthless. I care about Ethan, and I want to see him succeed." Richard stepped closer, towering over Marcus. "You're nothing more than a bad influence. I won't let you corrupt my son." Ethan's face flushed with anger. "Dad, stop. Marcus is trying to help me. He's not like you think. He's brave and kind." Richard's eyes narrowed, and he raised his hand as if to make a point. "You don't know anything about him. You don't understand the dangers out there." "Maybe you're the one who doesn't understand," Marcus interjected, his voice steady but firm. "Your son is struggling, and instead of listening to him, you're pushing him away. You're the one who should be ashamed." The confrontation had drawn the attention of a few parkgoers, who paused to watch the scene unfold. Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red, his anger palpable. "I'll call the police if you don't get away from him right now." "Go ahead," Marcus replied, unflinching. "But know this. I'm not the one who needs to be afraid of the law." Just as the tension reached its peak, a woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was dressed in smart casual attire, her demeanor calm yet authoritative. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the heated exchange. "I think we need to have a conversation." Richard turned to the woman, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. "Who are you?" "My name is Sarah, and I'm a social worker," she replied, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I've been observing this situation for some time now," Richard scoffed. "And what business is it of yours?" "Actually, it's very much my business," Sarah said, her tone firm. "I've been working on a case involving Ethan, and I have some serious concerns about his well-being." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath, her demeanor softening as she looked at Ethan. "What I mean is, I've noticed some troubling patterns in your home life, Ethan. Your father's attitude towards you is concerning, and I want to help you." Richard's face twisted in disbelief, his anger bubbling over once more. "You have no right to speak to my son like that. I'm a good father." "Are you?" Sarah challenged, her voice rising slightly. "Because the evidence I've gathered tells a different story. I've seen how you speak to him, how you dismiss his feelings. This isn't just about Marcus. It's about Ethan's safety and happiness." Richard blanched, the color draining from his face as he realized the gravity of the situation. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous." Marcus, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stepped closer to Ethan. "Ethan deserves to be heard, to feel safe, and to thrive. If that means involving the authorities, then so be it. You think you can just come in here and take my son from me?" Richard spat, his voice laced with panic. "I'm not here to take him away," Sarah replied, her tone calm yet resolute. "I'm here to ensure he's in a safe environment. If you truly care about Ethan, you'll listen to what's being said today and reflect on your actions." The tension in the air was thick, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on all of them. Richard faltered, his bravado wavering as uncertainty flickered across his face. I don't have to listen to this." "You do," Marcus said quietly, his voice a low rumble. "You may have power, but that doesn't give you the right to hurt your own son." Richard opened his mouth to retort, but the words failed him. He looked at Ethan, who stood resolutely beside Marcus, his gaze unwavering. The boy's courage seemed to breach the fortress of Richard's denial, sparking something within him that had long been buried. "I'm calling the police," Richard finally said, his voice shaky. But even as he spoke the words, they sounded hollow, an empty threat in the face of the growing awareness of his own failings. Sarah took out her phone. "Go ahead. I'll make sure they understand the situation, and will ensure Ethan's voice is heard." As Richard fumbled with his phone, Marcus turned to Ethan, pride swelling in his chest. "You did great, kid. You stood up to him." Ethan smiled weakly, tears glistening in his eyes. "I just want to be happy." "You will be," Marcus assured him. "You're not alone anymore." The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing closer. Richard's face twisted in a mixture of rage and fear, but as the police arrived, it was clear that the tide had turned. The officers listened intently as Sarah explained the situation, her calm voice contrasting sharply with Richard's frantic protests. In the end, as the officers led Richard away, Marcus felt a profound sense of relief. He hadn't just defended Ethan. He had stood up for something greater. He had confronted not only the prejudice that Richard represented, but also the darkness that had shadowed his own life for so long. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan turned to Marcus, his face lighting up. "Thank you, Marcus. You really are a hero." Marcus chuckled softly, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I'm just a man trying to do the right thing. But you, Ethan, you're the real hero here. You found your voice." With a new sense of purpose ignited within him, Marcus knew he had finally found a place where he belonged. The journey toward redemption was just beginning, but he was ready to embrace it. Together with Ethan, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their quest for kindness, hope, and a brighter future. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and share it with your friends. Your comment is essential for the growth of the channel. And look at this video that appears on the screen. See you soon.